Allow me to welcome you to another important area of political sociology. And this area, we want to understand or discuss the issue relating to political ideology. And ideology is an important area, as we are going to see in subsequent discussions on the topic, because it informs and it drives the various actions that are taken by various political players. And that is why it forms an important element when we are talking about political sociology generally, but also broadly the political institution. The discussion that we want to have today will focus on two principal areas. The first issue that we want to look at is what is meant by political ideology. And then we shall proceed to discuss some of the various types of political sociologies, and then conclude our discussion by looking at certain features that are common to all ideologies, or what generally we call as characteristics of political ideologies. So this is also a very, very critical area. And it is my hope that students who are pursuing any study around sociology, political science, community development, and even philosophy would find this discussion helpful. And I want to therefore invite all of you to this very, very important discussion. We want to begin by trying to understand what is meant by political ideology. And our beginning will be at the level in which we want to understand what generally is meant by an ideology. And we want to understand an ideology as a set of ideas, beliefs, and attitudes which are consciously or unconsciously held by persons or groups, and which reflects or shapes their understanding or misunderstanding about the social and political world. In other words, when you talk of an ideology, we simply mean people's worldview about certain things, and especially the social and political world. And this worldview may be accurate or inaccurate, and that's why we say it shapes the conception or the misconception. Now, when it comes to the term or the concept political ideology, it refers to a certain set of ethical ideals, principles, doctrines, myths, or symbols of a social movement, institution, class, or large group that explains how society should work and also offers some political and cultural blueprint for a certain social order. When we look at that definition of political sociology, it is quite broad, and it includes issues of ethics, issues of principles, issues of doctrines, but sometimes it could be a myth, and also it's associated with symbols. And it is also associated with a social movement, an institution, a class, or a large group of people. And therefore, ideological thinking can be described as a style of thinking which is rigid in its adherence to a doctrine and also resistant to evidence-based belief updating. In other words, when we talk of ideological thinking, we simply mean it's a line of thinking that is characterized by rigidity, that is, resistance or lack of flexibility about different perceptions. It is rigid, it is focused, and sometimes even those who hold a given ideology might still not change, even when they are presented with the facts that uh, clearly discredits the kind of thinking that they hold about a given issue. Ideologies are therefore conceptualized as long, coherent chains of thought that served as instruments for managing societies and negotiating social and political power. That is, when we talk of ideologies, we mean that they are instruments or lines of thinking or beliefs that individuals or groups use to negotiate for social and political power. We now want to look at some of the various types of political ideologies that are present in the world. Ideologies are quite many, but we have sieved some of the major types that exist in the world. And these are the ones that I want us to now discuss. One of the political ideologies that is widely known is called conservatism. Conservatism. And conservatism is a political ideology or philosophy that emphasizes traditions, hierarchy, and gradual change. That is, it places a strong emphasis on hierarchy, that is, order, and the need for individuals to acknowledge the obligations they have to a society based on their status within a given society. Conservatism also contends that for liberty or freedom to flourish, rather to grow, morality and social and personal order must exist, and that liberty without order must be avoided at all costs. In other words, while conservatists feel that there is need for freedom, individual freedom, but it is their belief that that freedom should be guided by the need for personal order. Otherwise, if there's no order in society, then the kind of freedom that humanity seeks to have, according to conservatism, should be avoided. Conservatives also advocates for a type of change which both gradual and adheres to established traditions and values that existed in the past. In other words, they agree the society can change, but any change that comes into place must be guided by traditions and values that exist in a given society. Otherwise, a change that seeks to disrespect or to devalue traditions and values that exist in the past, according to conservatism, should be avoided again. Conservatives favor the establishment of strong government institutions in an effort to limit human desire, which are often driven by selfishness, unruliness, and violence. So that to conservatives, they want a political system in which the central leadership is strong, the police is strong, the judiciary is firm, the executive is strong, the military and the police are well established, that where necessary, those instruments of the state can be used to defend and prevent violence and also individuals from advancing their selfish interests. So that when we talk about conservatism as ideology, we basically mean a political system or a political thinking in which there is need for traditions for hierarchy and order. And even if change is to take place, that change must be gradual and should be done with the understanding that it is not in any way rubbishing or belittling the existing social order, traditions, and values. The other type of political ideology is called nationalism. And nationalism is a type of political ideology that is based on the concept that a person's loyalty and devotion to the nation or the state takes precedence over any individual or group interest. That is, nationalism is a type of ideology that strictly advocates for individuals' adherence to their state, and therefore the state and its institutions are first and foremost the most important values that ideology of nationalism recognizes. It advocates for loyalty and devotion to the nation state over individual or group interest. In other words, it understands that sometimes individuals might be there, sometimes groups must be there that are so much influential. But however much influential they are, nationalism as a type of political ideology seeks to stress the need for individuals to still remain devoted to the state and loyal to the state other than individual or groups. And nationalists assert that members of their country are superior to citizens of other nations. In other words, when you talk of nationalists, they look at their country and elevate their country's nationals or citizens over and above the nationals or citizens of other states. In other words, they look at their nationals or citizens as the best, as the most superior compared to the ones that are from other states. They give them priority in terms of rights, in terms of freedom, in terms of access to essential services, among others. And nationalism advocates for a well defined geographical space, use of a common language, attachment to common customs, and in some cases, having a common religion. That is, when you talk about nationalism, they want certain things that can define, that can make them identify each other. That is like a geographical space, so that they say they will belong to this country, we belong to this territory. Again, the use of a common language. That's why when you look at some countries, try as much as possible to promote a given language as a national language, because language becomes an important source of unity. Again, they emphasize on attachment to common customs. They want to trace their origin to a common ancestry or a common tradition. Again, the issue of a common religion, where possible. They also seek to promote the need for citizens of a nation to be affiliated to a common single religion, because doing so gives them identity and uniformity that they believe would promote a national sense of unity and consensus about issues that they seek to pursue as a nation. The other type of uh, political ideology is called liberalism. And liberalism is a type of political ideology that is based on the rights of the individual, their liberty, and consent of the governed, political equality, right to private property, and equality before the law. When we look at liberalism closely, it is more like the other side, the opposite side of conservatism. Now, this ideology places the individual and individual rights as the highest priority and relies on the consent of the citizenry for the legitimacy of government power and political leadership. So, liberalism also believes that humans are rational, and because of this, they should have the right to make their own choices without the government's input. In other words, the liberals, as opposed to conservatism, that feel that the state needs to come in and give individuals direction in terms of what they do, because they believe that individuals are irrational and therefore incapable of doing the right thing on their own without guidance from the state. But when it comes to liberalism, they take the opposite view and think that people as human beings are rational. And because they are rational, they are capable of making their own decisions. They are capable of making choices that are good. And therefore, government intervention is considered as interference to the personal freedom of individuals. Now, these basic characteristics of liberalism have led to liberals to argue in favor of a limited government which draws its power from the people, while liberals still agree that governments can come in terms of helping people, in terms of providing direction to their citizens in a number of issues, but they think that the intervention should be limited. Otherwise, if too much government control, according to them, would limit human freedom and undermine the entire principle of liberalism. The liberalism also advocates for social welfare programs and more progressive policies that advances the rights of individuals and realization of individual freedoms. That is, when you look at most of the countries or most of the political wings or political formations that have embraced liberalism as a political ideology, there is greater emphasis on human rights, on individual rights, on Bill of Rights. And for them, what matters is the individual, not the state. Because according to them, a state is simply a collection of individuals. And therefore, the collective freedom and rights of individuals will amount to the is what constitutes state freedom. So for them, the emphasis is on the individuals and not the state. The other type of ideology is called socialism. Socialism is a type of political ideology that calls for public rather than private ownership or control of property and natural resources. Now, when you look at socialism, the concern is more in terms of how its resources in the community, in the society, in the state, be controlled and used. And socialism advocates more on the public, that is, that is government involvement in production as opposed to the private individuals, the companies, the factories, or the traders. They are concerned. They are more concerned about government coming in largely to dictate and give proper direction on how business and commercial activities are carried out. And socialism says that goods and resources should be owned and managed by the public and allocated based on the needs of the community rather than controlled solely by the state. So for liberals, for socialists, government needs to come in a big way to ensure that the goods and resources that are available in a country, they are managed by governmental institutions other than by the private sector. Again, socialists hold that human beings are social by nature, and society should respect this, and that individualism is poisonous. So much obsession with individualism as is found with liberals is totally opposed by socialists because they say human beings are social in nature and therefore we need to encourage them to act collectively rather than individually. because acting individually completely erodes or goes against the social nature of human beings. This ideology also advocates for all production and distribution decisions being made by the collective and directed by a central planner or a government body. The idea of individuals coming in is totally opposed by the ideology of socialism. And this ideology emphasizes for the establishment of robust welfare systems and social safety nets so that individuals rely on the state for everything from food to health care. They think that there are certain services that are so important, so essential to citizens that should never be left in the hands of the private sector, because doing so, it would mean that their cost would be so high, and therefore, given their importance, some citizens might lack them. And when they lack them, it will compromise their health and it will compromise their well being. And in that case, therefore, according to socialists, government needs to come in firmly and ensure that it has strong welfare programs, strong safety nets that are capable of safeguarding the welfare and the rights of citizens so that they may have adequate access to health care, to education, to food, to security, and other essential services. This is what socialists advocate. Another type of political ideology is called capitalism. And capitalism is an economic system where the factors of production are controlled and regulated by private businesses. And capitalists advocate for individual ownership of properties like factories, machines, and equipment that are owned by private individuals or companies. It is the opposite of what socialism is. Socialism emphasizes greater involvement of the state, but capitalists emphasizes individual participation as the focus of production and economic development in society. Capitalism also emphasizes for the right of individuals to make their own economic decisions without any interference. They think that government has no business dictating individuals what to buy, what to produce, how much, and where to sell it. They feel that individuals are rational enough to know what suits them, and market forces need to be left alone to dictate the prices. And when such forces are left to dictate prices, producers on their own will produce goods and services that meets the tastes of various consumers, and in the process that would lead to innovation and quality production. And the ideology of capitalism is also characterized by motive of earning profit as one of the most important drivers for capitalist economy. In other words, uh, this ideology is emphasizing that individuals need to be left alone, factories need to be left alone, business people need to be left alone, and every business should be managed in such a way that it is geared towards making a profit, and therefore profit making establishments become an important key concern of capitalism, so that even policies such as taxation, employment, and others need to be geared towards protecting businesses so that they're able to make profit. Capitalists believe that demand and supply in the market determines the production level and correspondingly the price set for the products without any kind of involvement from the government. I think this is what I've explained, where I stated that capitalists believe that government should never set prices. Government should not dictate what is produced. They should not dictate where goods and services are sold. They need to let this be determined by the market forces, the forces of supply and demand, and the process. Consumers would have value for what they purchase. That is what capitalism as a political ideology is emphasizing. Now, I now want us to look at some of the elements or what we call characteristics that exist in all political ideologies. We have looked at different types of political ideologies, but each ideology, it is embedded on certain characteristics, and these are now what I want us to pay some attention to. One of the major elements or characteristics of all political ideologies, including the one that we have not discussed, is the element of indoctrination. And indoctrination is a process of inculcating a person with ideas, attitudes, cognitive strategies, or professional methodologies. That is, training an individual to think in a given way. So, all political ideologies, there is that aspect that it seeks to train an individual to impart certain ideas, to impart certain attitudes, to impart such perspectives, so that individuals are able to see things through a given lens. And indoctrination involves the creation of a rigid dogma, which assumes the existence of only one truth to issues and corresponding solution to existing societal conditions. In other words, when you talk of uh, indoctrination, we are saying that it means to train individuals to be very much rigid and to completely close their minds to ideas that are not in sync with a given political ideology. In other words, individuals are trained to think in only one way, out of which nothing else exists. And indoctrinated individuals become rigid and dogmatic about truth, morality, and identity. They look at things from one direction. Any other direction is not in any way, do not exist as far as a given political ideology is concerned. An ideologically extreme individual, therefore, is one who possesses a rigid, evidence-resistant description of the world, strongly adheres to inflexible prescriptions for how they and others ought to live and act, and they also exhibit intense identification with fellow adherents and displays active hostility towards non-adherence. This is a key characteristic that we find. Whether we're in Kenya, we're looking Kenya Kwanza regime or Azimio political formation. Whether in the past we are looking at a NASA regime, rather NASA political formation, and Jubilee regime. And we can go on and on until the days of independence. The rigidity, the aspect of rigidity, the aspect of indoctrination still persists. And this is so because indoctrination is a major and critical element of all political ideologies. The other characteristic of political ideologies is what we call identity demarcation. That is, all ideologies invent and adopt clear identity markers, such as flags, symbols, anthems, costumes, and rituals that signal membership and devotion. We have seen this even in our own political systems, where parties have flags, and their flags, they have specific colors, and those have specific symbols that go with those colors. This is to show clear demarcation between one political ideology and the other, uh, so that the shared, visible, and physical nature of these identity markers fosters passionate feelings of immersion and connectedness with the ideological group. So that when we talk of all these things, it is clearly clear that once an identity is given, then it is designed to ensure that members of a given political ideological group remain so and use these markers to create a boundary, psychological boundary between them and those other people. These markers also signal who is not a member of one's ideological group or who is a less committed member. Indeed, for instance, there are people who can don particular party colors, but others might not know or might not don them. There are people who passionately speak about the leaders of their political party formations. There are others who criticize both constructively and destructively. And all these might signal the level of adherence or loyalty that given members of those political ideological groups have. Again, symbolic gestures and rituals serve as practical and tangible criteria for interpersonal behavior and the perceived legitimacy of collective action. Yes, you'll find people dancing, sometimes even songs are produced that are identifiable to a given political formation. This is done to reinforce membership, and these rituals, they're designed to ensure that members stick to their ideals, the ideals of their political party formations, and to reinforce commitment and loyalty to those particular political formations. For example, there are nationalistic flags and dress, religious and spiritual rituals, political parties and movements association with specific colors and symbols, and sports teams with the songs and colors. Even when you look at sports teams, you'll find teams have colors. They have songs. Some even have national anthems that they sing. It is a means of reinforcing commitment and ensuring that the identity that one political ideology has is distinctively different from the other groups that have or that hold a different political ideology. One other thing that is also a component of political ideology is propaganda. And by propaganda, we mean an organized and deliberate attempt whose intention is to shape public opinions towards a specific conclusion through the use of the following techniques. One of the techniques that propaganda is used is what we call the testimonials. Testimonial is a propaganda technique which refers to the use of endorsements by famous people, such as sports personalities, film stars, and others. We saw, for instance, during presidential campaigns in Kenya in 2022, musicians from outside, Diamond, Belia Bell, being invited to grace important political party meetings, religious leaders, gospel artists, and professionals being brought on board to give speeches to endorse a particular political movement. That is a propaganda technique which we call testimonials. Then there's also the aspect of the bandwagon. The technique appeals to the public to conform, such as political party promoting itself as the most popular with the public. Sometimes they say we are the most popular, but in actual sense they might not be. The other propaganda technique is called the name calling. And this technique refers to the use of negative labels or images in order to make competitors appear in an unfavorable light. This is also quite common, and we find it in many areas where politicians call each other's names with a view to making them look bad. We have seen in Kenya, for instance, Raila Odinga severally being called Kitondawili, and the current President Ruto increasingly being called Zakayo because of his desire to come up with various taxation measures. They're likening him to the Zakayo of the Bible. The other technique is called the plain fox appeal, and this attempt to sway public opinion by appearing to the average members of the public, such as a politician taking food in a roadside kiosks, to show that he's an ordinary person. We have seen such during campaigns, a politician getting into a kiosk and then using that to show that he's a down-to-earth person. For instance, in the current regime, while campaigning, used the word hustler, and Mama Mboga, that is the women selling vegetable, the roadside vegetable sellers, and told them that the regime that is coming to power belongs to the ordinary person. But we have seen political appointments, government make appointments in offices, and these appointments do not in any way reflect do not in any way captures or include the common man. It is still the elites that still dominate government appointments. Then we have what we call the plain fox appeal, and this is an attempt to sway the public opinion by appealing to the average members of the public, such as a politician taking food. I think this one I mentioned. Then we have the other one called glittering generalities. This entails the use of words that sound positive but have little real meaning, such as a political party declaring that is democratic visionary while offering no proof. A party can say that how much democratic it is, but when you look at the actual practice at the party level, they speak of or they depict completely opposite of what the party preaches. Then we have the other one we call the card staking, and this is first to the use of facts in a way that places a person in an unfavorable light while maligning the opponents. So these are some of the techniques of propaganda that are used. But the main issue here is that propaganda is a tool that is used by various political parties to achieve their end. We come to the end of this discussion. I want to encourage listeners to raise any issue that they feel is not clear or require further explanation in the comment section so that we can discuss it substantively. Thank you so much for listening to me.